Well, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. It's very nice to meet with you all. I'm Roddy Gow, the chairman and founder of the Asia-Scotland Institute, and I'm talking to you from Connecticut in the United States. And as you will discover, we have panelists in different places around the world. The Asia-Scotland Institute views looking at issues to do with climate and water as being extremely important. And of course, in today's current affairs, these are very, very vital topics which we shall be examining. But I'd like to start off by thanking Maya Gzureb, particularly for making this event possible and having drawn in the panelists. And I will be asking her to introduce them in just a moment. Maya is an Lit candidate in security studies at the University of St Andrews and leads the Europe division of climate cardinals. And in that respect, her research delves into the, I quote, gendered aspects of resource security in the Middle East and Central Asia. She also works with us at the Asia-Scotland Institute, and we're delighted at all the support she's given us working with our team. So Maya, thank you for making this possible. And now I'd like to hand over the moderation of this meeting to you. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. So I would like to briefly just introduce Bruce Pinier as the first speaker, who is a Central Asia Fellow in the Eurasia program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and has an incredible legacy as a journalist working at Radio Free Europe. And within that scope, he has put together a Kishlock Odyssey blog and also hosts a renowned podcast on Central Asian affairs called the Majlis podcast. And following that, we have Dr. Asel Mirzakulova, who is a senior research fellow at the Bishkek campus at the University of Central Asia. And Asel is a expert on border studies, human mobility, environmental change, natural resource management, and adaptation and security. So thank you so much for joining us, Bruce and Asel.
Bruce, over to you.
Hey, thank you very much. And thank you to the Asia Scotland Institute for the invitation to participate in this event. And thanks to everyone who's attending. Um, Water is the most valuable resource in Central Asia. So many reports about Central Asia these days are about energy resources such as oil, natural gas, uranium, or more recently, critical raw materials. But for the people living in Central Asia, water has always been the most important resource. And I'd like to start by reminding what a map of Inner Asia looks like. There's two large deserts in Western Central Asia. To the south, there are deserts in Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And to the east, on the other side of the Tian Shan Mountains, there's the Taklamakan Desert in Xinjiang, and a bit further east, the Gobi Desert. So Central Asia is surrounded on three sides by vast desert land. I want to deal first with some basic information. The population at the start of the 20th century was about 8 million people. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the population of Central Asia was about 50 million people. And the population today is about 80 million people. So prior to the Soviet period, settlements in Central Asia were where the water is naturally, along rivers, at the foothills of the mountains and oases. This is still true, but during the Soviet period, water was redirected, and it became possible to establish towns in areas that were previously uninhabitable, or certainly unable to support large populations. I'll use Turkmenistan's capital, Ashgabat, as an example. The Turkmen government says the population of Ashgabat today is about 1 million people. Ashgabat is located in the foothills of some small mountains, so there is a natural limited amount of water available there. But otherwise, it's surrounded by the Karakum Desert, or as the Turkmen call it, the Garagum Desert. There were small settlements in the area prior to the arrival of the Russians. And of course, Nisa, the capital of the Parthian Empire, 2,000 years ago was there, testament to the fact that once upon a time in this southwestern corner of Central Asia, there was a lot more water than there is now. But when the Russians colonized the area in the late 19th century, they chose one of the villages in what's now Ashgabat to be their administrative center in southwestern Central Asia. This remained true during the Soviet period also. Again, the area is in the desert, so there was a dilemma about how to supply the necessary amount of water to a city with a growing population. The earthquake in 1948 leveled Ashgabat. And as the city was being rebuilt, Soviet planners came upon the idea of building a canal that would take water from the Darya, one of Central Asia's two great rivers, and bring it across the desert to Ashgabat. The Garagum Canal, I'll use the Turkmen term, the Garagum Canal fully opened in the late 1980s. It has the capacity to carry up to 13 billion cubic meters of water annually. And just to give you an idea of what 13 billion cubic meters of water looks like, the massive Taktagul Reservoir in Kyrgyzstan, these days at its peak season, probably holds about 13 billion cubic meters of water. And if you've ever flown over the Taktagul Reservoir, or better yet, taken the road that skirts part of it, as I have many times, you know that the Taktagul Reservoir is huge. And I'm going to use it for comparison purposes again in my speech. The Garakum Canal is an extreme example of water diversion. But there's hundreds of smaller canals around Central Asia taking water from rivers and bringing it far away to agricultural fields and towns. I'll also mention Mangistau region in Kazakhstan, where they're doing most of their oil exploration and drilling at the moment. And without diversion of water, it would be impossible to sustain the communities that are there. A lot of this water that they're diverting goes to cotton, and we know the problem with that. And I'll mention the Aral Sea a little bit in a minute. But this process of water diversion is continuing even to this day. As is so often true with figures on anything these days, there's various numbers about how much water in Central Asia goes toward agriculture, but it seems to be somewhere between 70 and 80% of the water used in Central Asia is used for agricultural purposes. Since the 5 countries became independent in 1991, the amount of irrigated land in Central Asia has increased from some 2.2 million hectares to some 10 million hectares. So it's completely understandable, as the governments have to meet the food needs of their people. But when Uzbek President Shavkat Mirziyoyev spoke about water conservation in his country in November 2023, he said dilapidated irrigation canals were responsible for Uzbekistan wasting up to 14 billion cubic meters of water annually, or roughly the amount of water that's in the Taktagul Reservoir. The point of Mirziyoyev's remarks was that Uzbekistan needed to repair its irrigation canals, which they're doing, and so is Kazakhstan. Both those countries in Kyrgyzstan are also building new reservoirs to hold the water from the spring rains, which used to just go out into the fields and evaporate and usually cause destruction while it flooded areas in the region also. But now they finally caught on to the fact that they're having to conserve this water and contain it so that they can use it for their own purposes in the future. So that's the situation now, but what about the future? Central Asia is one of the regions in the world where the effects of climate change are most visible. Remember, there are deserts in the west, south, and east, and these deserts are all expanding. Large areas of Central Asia experienced drought in the summers of 2021, 2022, and 2023. 2024 brought some relief. There was an unusual amount of rainfall across much of Central Asia in the first half of 2024. It caused historic flooding in Kazakhstan, but thanks to Kazakhstan's water conservation efforts, it also helped fill new reservoirs and some older reservoirs that in some cases had been dry for decades. But the trend in recent years has been diminishing rain and snowfall. During the last 4 summers, many parts of Central Asia have seen record high temperatures. In December 2023, the president of Kyrgyzstan's National Academy of Sciences, Kanat Abdurakhmatov, said studies showed that since 1991 in Kyrgyzstan, the average number of days of winter has decreased from 95 to 71, and the average number of summer days has increased from 145 to 154. Now that's Kyrgyzstan, but generally that's probably true across Central Asia and might even be more accented in some parts that are further to the west. Tajikistan's president, Emomali Rahman, just repeated in May this year that of the 14,000 glaciers that were in Tajikistan's mountains a few decades ago, 1,000 have disappeared, and the others are slowly melting and shrinking. Kyrgyzstan's experiencing the same problem. Siphoning water from the Darya for agricultural fields in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan is the reason the Aral Sea is now only 1/10 the size it was 50 years ago. The legacy of that, or the result of that, is that dust storms are now becoming more frequent and larger than at any time in recorded history in Central Asia. The alkaline soil of the dried up Aral seabed and sands from the expanding Karakum and Kizilkum deserts in western Central Asia are sometimes blown all the way to the Tian Shan and Pamir Mountains in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. The capitals of Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan have all been enveloped by dust storms in recent years, which never used to happen. The strain on water supply due to growing population and the effects of climate change are also straining relations between countries and between communities. Water use was one of the main issues in the long dispute along the Kyrgyz-Tajik border that led to the only battles between two armies of Central Asian countries since 1991 independence. Now, water was part of a broader dispute over land ownership in that area, but any activity along the canal, which was built during the Soviet times to serve two communities which were Soviet republics, and it was not a problem. They were part of the same country internally, but now, of course, they're two separate countries. But any attempt to mess with that canal, even repairs, cleaning it out, whatever, arouses suspicion on the other side of the border immediately. And so it raised tensions in the area and led to conflicts, which started out as arguments between Kyrgyz and Tajik communities along the border, and then ended up escalating into throwing sticks and stones, and then to the actual pitched military battles of April 2021 and September 2022, which left more than 200 people dead, hundreds of people injured, and caused millions and millions of dollars of damage, property damage. The potential for such conflicts over transboundary water use remains true in several areas of Central Asia, and I would point out right here that it's most notable in the enclaves, the Tajik and Uzbek enclaves in Kyrgyzstan, where water is still a flashpoint, and people are always accusing one side of using more water than they were supposed to have, or taking more water, or cutting off water to their communities. So this is a potential problem going forward in the future. A more common problem that we're likely to see more of as water supplies dwindle is the situation that developed in the first summer of drought in 2021. Farmers and herders around Central Asia appealed, sometimes demanded, their governments do something to help them. After all, their crops and animals were providing food for the people. This created tensions between farming communities and the authorities as officials scrambled to find money or other means of assistance. Areas in or around Almaty, Kazakhstan, and Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan suffered water shortages, and some people were left without water at all for several days. In the case of Kyrgyzstan, it led to protests, both by residents of apartment blocks cut off from water and from farmers, some of whom blocked roads demanding they receive water. The most disturbing incidents that summer, in my opinion, happened in Kyrgyzstan's northern Chui province, where some farmers went out at night and either took water from the canals that all the farmers depended upon, or in some cases, individuals diverted water to their land. It led to authorities eventually having to post guards along the canal to deter water thieves. Such incidents have happened in other countries when water became scarce, and they can be expected to happen again in Central Asia when the extreme water shortages occur. And last, there are the large hydropower projects, Kambar 1 in Kyrgyzstan and Rogun in Tajikistan. These enormous hydropower plant projects require huge reservoirs, which means curtailing the flow of water to downstream countries while the reservoirs fill. Uzbekistan's first president, Islam Karimov, opposed Tajikistan's construction of the Rogun hydropower plant, fearing it would leave the agricultural fields of Uzbekistan without sufficient water. And without specifically mentioning Rogun, he warned in 2012 that water could become the reason for war in Central Asia. At the moment, downstream countries, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, support and are actually participating in construction of the hydropower projects in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. That's not always been the case, and it might not be the case in the future. Hopefully, we'll talk a little bit about the Caspian Sea and its shrinkage, and also about the Koch-Tepe Canal in Afghanistan. But I'm out of time for now, and I yield the floor to other speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce, for contextualization. And let me start with my talk, which will focus on hydropolitical dynamics in Central Asia. And in my talk, along with Aral Sea basin dynamics, I will also touch the transborder rivers which go beyond Aral Sea basin. So as Bruce already noted, Central Asia region was one of the hot post of so-called hydraulic mission. In the history of this region, we study water infrastructure and building this huge canals which transmit water to the deserts as one of the core tool how Soviet Union and previously Tsarist Empire govern this region. So in this map you can see by the red color the canals which divert water from the major two rivers of the region, Darya and Darya. Currently, Darya not reach Aral Desert. And as Bruce already noted, in Kazakhstani part of the sea, we can see some dynamics to restore Northern Aral Sea. But still, what I want to say that all this huge infrastructure and this heritage of Soviet water management heavily depend how modern Central Asian states behave in terms of water diplomacy, water negotiations, etc. Because all this infrastructure very heavily affect decision making in region. From one hand, it's this heritage of hydraulic mission put all Central Asian states together, and we could say that the first agreement between countries was about water. After dissolution of the Soviet Union. But from another hand, all this heritage also lead to some tensions and in some part of our history, conflictual situations. So here you can see satellite images of disappearance of the RLC. And in my practical work with different stakeholders in Central Asia, I very often hear opinion that Soviet methods of water management was very modern, very progressive, etc. And then I show this picture and ask, probably we should critically think about recent past and try to put and establish new values for water use and water governance in our region. So Aral Sea catastrophe, it's not climate change catastrophe. It's a catastrophe of Soviet water management. And this led to the disappearance of the third biggest lake in the world. But current situation actually add complexity to all these old problems. What I mean by current situation is the dynamics of climate change. And in this slide, you can see projections until end of the century for Central Asian region. And how the climate in the region will be changed according to different scenarios. So we have two, let's say, mega kind of projections. First, that climate in region will become more hotter and dry. And second projection, that climate will be more wetter and hot. Specifically, these projections depend from dynamics of many factors, and for water availability and water balance, the glacier melt dynamics is very important to understand. And despite of all this change, which already affected Central Asian countries and societies, the water governance system not adaptive in this regard. Here you can see the major water governance institutions in region. It is the Interstate Commission for Water Coordination, which was established in 1992 and then integrated to IFAS system. CAREC Water Initiative, which one of the biggest player in terms of technical support, basin dialogue, and policy harmonization. But in all these frameworks and institutions, still no real kind of working discussion about how Soviet heritage of water allocations and water use in region should be adapted to current climate change and projected climate change dynamics, and what kind of mechanisms of conflict preventions should countries take into account. Partially, this situation with reluctant water management system in region mirror situation in broader political processes. Until just this year, last year, in region we could saw the huge clash between hydraulic borders and national borders or state borders. Why it's important for water management and water governance? Because a lot of reservoirs between countries was situated in transborder areas. Not all of 2008 reservoirs, some of them was situated and still situated in transborder areas. And countries had a very long border dispute between Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan and Fergana Valley. And these border disputes heavily affected water governance in region because it's only one part of the picture. Because border negotiations wasn't a success, hasn't success long time until just these years. Countries had added kind of complexity in these conflicts by searching ways to resolve this water management problems via kind of border negotiations, and this creates a situation when both processes like water negotiations and border negotiations started. But after 2016, the situation changed heavily, and currently we have situation with, I think, diplomatical success in region. All three countries which have shared borders in Fergana Valley finally achieved border agreement. And as a result, water conflicts was also resolved in terms of building new cascades in Upper Darya or in Zarafshan River or in Amud area. So what I want to note here that border negotiations and water negotiations is it was very interconnected in the region. But still here the picture from 87th meeting of the Interstate Water Commission of the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea last year in November. And you can see this mismatch. In the first photo, behind you can see 5 flags. but on the table you can see 4 ministers. So, and this indicates that Kyrgyzstan, which is one of the major countries where the water originated for Darya, around 75%, not took a part on this meeting because they've frozen membership in Aral Sea Basin Fund, and also not participated in basin-wide talks, etc. But it does mean that Kyrgyzstan excluded from any kind of negotiations. Now country tried to push more bilateral water agreements, and because country not consider multilateral organizations in their current design as effective institutions to manage water issues in region. So that's why country became more proactive in building bilateral agreements with Uzbekistan, with Kazakhstan. For Amur Darya, we have very interesting dynamic that we know that Afghanistan was excluded from any formal agreements around Amur Darya, but it is upstream country on territory which part of the flow originated. And according, for example, scenario A2, climate change scenario A2, which was produced by IPCC, it is expected that until 2050, in Amur Darya, it is possible reduction of water balance by from 10 till 15%, and new Kosh-Tepe canal along with the climate change dynamics in this basin will heavily affect reduction of available water for downstream Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. Now we can see a huge diplomatic efforts from both countries to contribute the technical assistance for this canal construction. But along with Aral Sea Basin, Central Asian hydropolitics also has very interesting dynamics beyond major Central Asian rivers. For example, the southern part of Kazakhstan heavily depend from a transborder river for which Russia is the upstream country. So currently there is no really integrated river basin management plan between Kazakhstan and China, and also between Kazakhstan and Russia. And we know that after the dissolution of Soviet Union, neighboring countries, it's China and Iran, start to build new water infrastructure in a transborder river. And Kazakhstan already has a big consequences on this in Ili River. According studies, that Kazakhstan experienced a decrease decrease in water availability in Ili, and probably it will be worsened due climate change, and still it is some diplomatic efforts to negotiate with China along with Russia on joint management plan. So in this transborder river. And of course, it is very important to know that in 2000, Iran also built a transborder reservoir in a transborder with Turkmenistan reservoir, which also wasn't possible before 1991. So what I want to say that now water or hydropolitical dynamics in region which traditionally considered through Aral Sea basin prism became more and more diverse. Now we have situation with more active relations with China. And for example, for Kyrgyzstan, several years ago, Kyrgyzstan and China signed memorandum on building new hydro cascade in Sarıcas River. It's a Tarim basin. It's not part of the Aral Sea basin. So Central Asian hydropolitics now became more and more diverse in these terms. So let me stop here because lack of time, and just let me also share these two links to policy briefs which I produced under support of United States Institute of Peace. Unfortunately, this organization no more operates. So yeah, and let's discuss these issues. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for both those presentations. I just wanted to touch on something that came to mind when you were presenting about Afghanistan and the lack of exposure that they had in negotiations, and you also mentioned China and Russia, who, all of these three actors aren't necessarily involved in the institutions that you mentioned, be it the IFAS or the other three institutions that you brought up. So I was just wondering, based on the multilateral efforts that are being put forward for like water management, because as you said, what happened with the RLC was water mismanagement, not climate change. Is there anything that like you see for future engagement going forwards with these actors, be it Afghanistan or Russia or China, in terms of their involvement with putting forward anything with respect to agreements or just anything to kind of mediate or bridge some kind of mutual understanding or yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It is a time of water diplomacy for Central Asian states. We can see that, for example, Uzbekistan opened the second transborder free economic zone in Termez in the border with Afghanistan. It also could be considered like part of to solve water issues via other kind of instruments. But also, I think we should recognize that Afghanistan as a riparian state has a right for withdrawals from Amur Darya. And it is also mirror, I think, when in Central Asia, among public opinion, it's a big critique for this, of course, canal, etc. But we also should I think this critical think about this situation, and also I think for me it's mirror approach to the water resources as we already experienced it during the intensive water use approach during the Soviet period. So it's also I mean as Bruce mentioned about Garakum Canal and how many water are allocated to watering deserts. In Kosh-Tepe Canal, it's a kind of trade-offs. From one hand, we see that Afghanistan needs this canal because the food shortage and food insecurity in the country, and to produce food they need water, of course. But from another hand, the technical side of this project is very worrying. It is Earth Canal without any kind of protection, and of course it will be huge water losses, and again environmental unfortunately it will lead to next environmental catastrophe. So I think from this regard, diplomatic efforts is much needed to balance these interests. And regarding probably Bruce, do you want to add on this on Kosh-Tepe?
The only thing I would throw in there is one of the problems they have with Kosh-Tepe. You're quite right. I mean, of course, Afghanistan has the right to the water. I know that some of the officials, and certainly in Uzbekistan, have pointed out that it's hard. You can't reach a water accord with Afghanistan right now because their government isn't formally recognized. So that's like one of the big immediate obstacles to coming to some kind of water agreement with Afghanistan. Until you recognize the Taliban government, you can't conclude a formal agreement on water use.
Bruce, can I ask you a question, or both of you a question? This enormous Chinese project, which started in the middle of July this month, around what in India is known as the Brahmaputra, what is the impact of that going to be?
What is it going to be on Central Asia? I'm not entirely sure. I know India has raised a lot of objections for obvious reasons, not only because of the water loss, but because of the spiritual nature of the river itself. So that's I mostly do Central Asia. I would note that, and possibly just to keep everyone in Central Asia calm, there was a recent report that China has released more water into both the Ili and Irtysh rivers this year to Kazakhstan, and given them an additional 10 billion cubic meters of water in the first half of 2025. So if anyone on the Kazakh side of the border is worried about what's happening with the new dam, for what it's worth, China has released more water, some of which has gone into Lake Balhash.
So that's interesting. Right. Thank you.
Could I bring up a few messages, a few questions that came up on the chats? So in case any of these resonate with the presentation, there's one about whether the Israeli-Palestine conflict has any repercussions on Central Asian water politics. And also one that came up about whether measures can be done to reduce evaporation from reservoirs, especially transborder ones. And the last one is around efforts to promote underground water storage.
About evaporation, I think probably technically, if technically it could be done if it will be underground reservoirs, as it practiced in other parts of the world, for example, in Asia, some cases exist underground reservoirs, but for Central Asia, it's arid and semi-arid climate, the best choice to store water in mountains, in mountain reservoirs, because evaporation will be much less compared to the lowlands areas. So I will say here this spatial kind of aspect play a role. has the Israel-Palestinian conflict got anything central water politics? Probably Bruce knows. I think no. I think no. No links with this case.
No, yeah, I don't see any connection, to tell you the truth.
Yeah,
In fact, the only connection I can imagine with water in that part of the world is that Israel, at least in the 1990s, was helping him with drip farming in Central Asia. But the current conflict in the Middle East has no impact on the water shortages in Central Asia.
About efforts to promote the groundwater storage, I don't know, but I think it is discussion in expert level, probably in Turkmenistan or Uzbekistan. And regarding John Delph's question about Eleanor Ostrom principle, yes, it was, as you know, this principle was one of the core agenda for Central Asian and globally, I think, water reformer and establishing water users associations and decentralization of water governance after land and water reform in 1990s. So it was very common. I mean, but the problem why it wasn't fully implemented or hadn't success in region, I think that it's ownership issue because these principles was very donor-driven kind of agenda for Central Asian states. So that's why, for example, in Kyrgyzstan, we can see that just recent water code returned to the state-centric water governance system. I see in a chat two questions from Erkinbek Kamalov about this weaponization of water, etc. I think it is very. I think we should clearly say that it is water. It's not a resource for conflicts or for the narratives of war. In Central Asia, it is a narrative of coexistence and peace building. And I think it is, I don't know how it's work. I mean, this knowledge production about conflict, etc. If we will critically analyze the Central Asian water politics in the last 30 years, we can see that it was tensions, but along with these tensions, countries all time find ways to negotiate. It wasn't any, we haven't any cases in Central Asian history when countries came to the open conflicts around the water. All time it was room for diplomacy and negotiations. So I think it is very important to say that water for Central Asia is a resource for cooperation, and everybody knows this. And tensions which was and still in place about ecosystem services, because upstream countries provide ecosystem services for downstream countries, and this mechanism should be recognized, and it's not fully recognized yet because of Soviet past dependence approach to govern water, to use water, etc. But it will take time, I think.
Bruce, do you see the US administration playing any sort of role in this part of the world in terms of funding?
The current administration, probably in terms of water conservation, that little, if any, I would say at this point. I don't see that being, I mean, the major most of the attention the U.S. is giving to the region now is its possibilities for critical minerals at the moment. Water conservation would have to be something that would be private NGOs or private company or something. I would imagine that might be involved in something like that. But water conservation in Central Asia is not way up on the list of the current administration, at least as far as I've ever heard. Um, if I could just comment on a couple other things. One, I wanted to also comment on weaponization of water too a little bit. I think it's important to remember with weaponization of water that the upstream countries, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, are also very small countries. I mean, the water is going to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. So, I mean, just from that perspective, it would be hard to weaponize water because that would unleash exactly what I mentioned Islam Karimov saying a while ago, where if he didn't, Uzbekistan doesn't think it's getting enough water, and then it might take measures to actually take the water that it wants. And I see there's also another question about the Caspian Sea in here, and is it headed in the same direction as the Aral Sea? So I want to just say a couple words about that too. I mean, it's early. It seems the Caspian Sea is shrinking. I think at least I'm not clear as if this is a cycle or a solid trend going forward into the future. You remember in the 70s, the Caspian Sea was shrinking also, and there was thoughts that it might go down, and then all of a sudden it was resurgent and the water came back up. Certainly, water use from the Volga is much greater than it used to be. That's going to be a problem because that also, if you want to solve this, then you got to negotiate with Russia for that. And Russia would probably be very obstinate about trying to curtail its own water use. I can imagine they would just say, we'll make some efforts toward it, but we need the water that we need in the Volga. And until that's resolved, you won't see great volumes of water coming back into the Caspian Sea. But again, it's unclear. This might just be like we saw in the 70s, where we go through a cycle of 10 or 15 years of it shrinking, and then suddenly it comes back again and starts to fill up more than it was. So it's a tough situation right now, and I understand why a lot of people in the Caspian region are very apprehensive about it, particularly since their solution to water problems in the area around the Caspian Sea, right on the shoreline, has been desalination plants. But if you're going to start, if the Caspian Sea is really shrinking, then desalination just accelerates the process of the shrinking Caspian Sea, and you certainly can't build any new towns, ports, things like that on the Caspian Sea. That would accelerate it even more.
I also see the question in a chat about water storage in mountains. The question is there any work on pumped storage and linked energy provision with water? Not yet in region, but as we know, a lot of technical opportunities exist, but the question with investments. For Kyrgyzstan and for Tajikistan, it's very hard to find investors for their water projects, water infrastructural projects, and water energy projects. So that's why I think if we refer to the global experience, it's a lot of new technical approaches how to deal and how to meet more effective use of water and energy, but as a problem with investments.
Maya, as there aren't much more time for this webinar, I wonder if you'd like to ask each of the panelists to draw their conclusions and yourself, and then hand back to me. Could you do that, please?
Yes. Can I pass to Bruce if you have anything to conclude?
The reduction in water supplies is a reality of Central Asia. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be. Another 15 or 20 years, the population of Central Asia will probably be 100 million. Once the Koch-Tepe Canal is open, if they finish it, and if it's open, there's going to be a major shockwave in Central Asia. effectively all the downstream communities from where they're drawing water from the Darya are most of them are going to cease to exist. Turkmenistan is going to have a very difficult time in dealing with that, and I think that's that's really when we're going to get the first big reaction, and probably probably spark a lot of actions within Central Asia to try to stretch the water supplies as much as possible. But at the moment, you can see where they're headed, and it's going to be a problem in the future. But I think the big wake up call is coming after 2028 when the Koch-Tuck Canal is done, and you have to resettle hundreds of thousands of people. We've mentioned the RLC Canal, it already, or the RLC, the Darya already, it's more than 100 kilometers from what the RLC used to be when it gives out. Well, now that's going to come back another 100 kilometers or something too. So what are you going to do with those communities? And it's going to cause, like I said, it'll be resettlement, but where do you resettle to? Are people going to head to the east toward the mountains, and can they handle that? And as this problem continues to grow over the course of the decades, where will people resettle? I mean, I know I've seen what an argument in Russia made. They had those great water diversion schemes from the rivers, Siberian rivers in the 1950s that they came up with, that they were going to bring water from the Ob and Tennessee rivers and divert it. And they would come into Central Asia, and they never did for a lot of reasons. But that idea keeps getting resurrected as time goes on. It just was again about a year ago. One of these Soviet scientists up there, or excuse me, Russian scientists came up and said, "Look, we can do that or face the prospect of having tens of millions of Central Asians as migrants, as refugees, and coming to Russia in the next 40 or 50 years when water runs out in Central Asia." So this is just one example of the different aspects of this problem.
I just want to draw our attention to the informed decision making and importance of research to inform along with the public opinion, but also decision making. I think Central Asia needed investment not only to build this infrastructure, but or to rebuild, or but also to study. I think to study current dynamics and past dynamics, etc. I think we have a problem with critical knowledge production, and with I think without such context of discussions and critical assessment, etc., it's very hard to influence and make informed decision making and evidence-based decision making. So in this regard, I think the huge investment in Central Asian research and study Central Asia is really needed. And not only this small perception of Central Asia, it's bigger Central Asia.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to speak, and everyone for attending this event, because I agree. I resonate deeply with the fact that such a small region is in need of much more dialogue and discourse on what's going on. So I really appreciate this panel being an opportunity to bridge that gap in shedding light on something that's going on that isn't nearly discussed as much as it should be. So thank you.
Well, I'd just like to say, Maya, thank you very much indeed to the panel on behalf of the Asia-Scotland Institute. I detect that one of the great concerns, because it's elsewhere in the world as well, is that climate and lack of water is going to drive massive migration. There's going to be a lot of suffering of people, as we've seen in Africa and elsewhere, with the move towards Southern Europe and elsewhere. And we're in for some very troubling times, partly a residue of the ignorance and poor management from Soviet times, but also from the gradual erosion of water supplies to people. And both of our panelists have focused on this, and it's very important that we watch these developments. And for that reason, We are hugely grateful for spending time with us today. And I'm sure when we put the recording of this discussion up on YouTube, we will get a lot more questions and it will raise a lot of other issues. But on behalf of the Institute, thank you, everybody.